Major breaking news that happened overnight. Iranian state media is reporting that the nation's President Raisi and the country's foreign minister have died in a helicopter crash. Search teams arrived at the site of what was originally called a hard landing and found no sign of life. According to a news outlet affiliated with the Iranian government, 7 other officials were on board the aircraft at the time of the accident. The Associated Press cites Iranian state TV as giving no immediate cause for the collision, although weather could be a factor. The group was returning from an event near Iran's border with Azerbaijan when the helicopter crashed. Heavy fog prevented search and rescue teams from finding the wreckage for hours. A hardline conservative within the Iranian political landscape, Raisi had been Iran's president since 2021. David Ignatius, your thoughts and concerns given this breaking news?
So, Mika, at a time when there's war and instability across the Middle East, this adds one more element. It's unlikely to mean any sharp change in Iranian policy. The true leader is the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. He remains in charge, but he's 85. And Raisi, the president, was widely seen as the most likely successor to him. So this creates a kind of succession quandary for Iran. In the immediate future, the current vice president, whose name is Mohammad Mokhber, will become interim president in effect. Elections will be declared 50 days from now. In theory, we'll have a new Iranian president. That person isn't likely to be fundamentally different in terms of policies. This is a regime that moves in step. But in terms of the future after Ayatollah Khamenei, this is an interesting development. There's talk that Khamenei's own son, Moshtaba, might be a leading candidate. He's said to be favored by the IRGC. I just note one other interesting phenomenon here. Even as Iran has been deepening its confrontation with Israel, firing 100 ballistic missiles and more than 200 drones in April, none of which were successful, it's been trying to open more of a dialogue with the United States. Last week, an Iranian foreign ministry official met with Brett McGurk, our top NSC Middle East person in Oman, to talk about issues of mutual concern. At the time of that missile strike, the Iranians made an effort to contact the U.S. through the Swiss embassy, exchange messages, understand exactly who would do what. So I think we're heading into a period where, as Khamenei himself said, there'll be no disruption in Iranian policy. But think about it. You've got uncertainty in Iran. You've got uncertainty in Israel. You now have almost an open contest for future leadership of Israel. And you've got an American presidential election. You couldn't have a more unstable mix of factors over the Middle East at this most dangerous time.
Joe.
And certainly, Admiral, we've heard about the dangers, the great dangers that we've been facing in the region, obviously since October 7th, and certainly with Iran. I will say, though, it's fascinating hearing what David said regarding Iran's contacts with the Swiss embassy. I heard the same thing, and I'm sure you did too, after the killing of Soleimani. The Iranians fired some missiles at U.S. targets and then immediately told people in the region, please get back to the United States. That's it. We had to show some force for domestic consumption. You, of course, had the United States warning Iran back channel about an imminent attack, a terror attack a few months ago. Things are not always as cut and dry as they appear. And I just love for you to go through your decades of experience dealing in the region, dealing with Iran directly or indirectly, and give us your best read on where we go from here.
The only thing I know for sure is that the Vice President of the United States will not be going to Tehran to attend this particular funeral. There's certainly no love lost between our two countries. But I think, Joe, you and David are right to highlight two aspects of this that jump out at me. Number one, the presidency of Iran, which will have to be filled and will be filled, is not the prize here. The prize is who is the next supreme leader. Khamenei, the current incumbent, has cancer, mid-80s. Certainly, that's going to come sooner rather than later. I'd put my money on his son more than anybody else, but nobody knows the answer to that question, and that's going to drive a lot of internal maneuver and politics. And oh, by the way, if we think here in the United States we're prone to conspiracy theory, certainly Iran, its populace is prone to it, starved of actual information. Look for conspiracy theories that'll pop up about who might have manufactured this. Was Israel involved? Was the CIA part of this? The answer to all those questions are almost certainly no. Bad weather, probably bad maintenance, probably bad airmanship is what caused this. But the second big thing here, and again, you alluded to it a moment ago, is that Iran does not want this to explode into a wider regional war. This is the last thing they would want now while they're in the midst of their version of Game of Thrones here. So look for the Iranians to send signals to the United States, potentially to other actors in the region. They're close in the Arab world with Qatar. Relatively so. Look for them to signal, look, let us alone right now. We've got to sort this out. Yeah. Now's not the time for anyone to take advantage.
And Richard, following up on that, obviously, this president died at a time when he'd been facing domestic unrest. Also, economically, Iran's been struggling. We can look back over the past 10, 15 years and see that Iran is divided. You sort of have red state Iran, blue state Iran, in that the urban center is far different than rural Iran. This is a country divided, trying to figure out its way forward. It would seem to me the last thing they would want to do is begin a regional war.
Look, they got a lot on their plate. I agree. Let's say a few things, because I think both the Admiral and David got it exactly right. One is Raisi's legacy is not real impressive, Joe, and it gets at what you were saying. What was it about? It was about repression. He leaves a more divided society and real economic mismanagement. The currency is much weaker and so forth. That's essentially what he's done. I think the fact that he's out of the running because he's dead for the supreme leader is interesting, because it does go to his son. If it does go to Khamenei's son, then it raises real question of hereditary processes here. And the question is, does that detract from the legitimacy of the supreme leader? So I think the death of the president has almost no impact in the short run, because the president doesn't have a lot of authority over the things we would talk about on the show, national security and so forth. It's more of a domestic role. The real question is what implications does it have for the long-term legitimacy of the regime? And it gets at the splits within the society. My own guess, though, is this regime probably has, unfortunately, more staying power or continuity than any of us would like to see.
Yeah, no doubt about that. David Ignatius, so following up, I think fascinating insight by Richard when he's talking about how if being the supreme leader of Iran is more hereditary, that further weakens, at least in the eyes of Shia in that region, the standing of at least religiously leadership in Iran compared to Sistani, who's still in Iraq, who still really is seen as the supreme Shiite leader. And this sort of hereditary pass down would, I think, possibly even weaken Iran's ultimate influence in Iraq.
So, Joe, to me, Raisi, the president now dead, was a symbol of a regime that in many ways is running out of gas. He was not a distinguished cleric. He wasn't somebody whose religious views were taken seriously. He was the enforcer. He was a judge. He was the person who, when Ayatollah Khomeini wanted to clean up in the late 80s, was assigned the judge of basically being the hanging judge, and is said to have sent to the execution more than 1,000 people. He was the reliable servant of the revolution, but he didn't enhance or expand that revolution. And during his time, as president. We saw young Iranians just an explosion of celebrating personal freedom, women taking off their headscarves, throwing them away, risking, at least for some weeks and months, being arrested. For a long time, the regime couldn't get that back under control. So, as a Western diplomat has said to me once, you need to think of Iran as being on a one-way street. That street is toward the end of the regime. How fast it will go down that street, hard to tell. It could be many, many years. They're still very powerful. But there's no sign of this regime really rehabilitating itself in the eyes of its people. Raisi was not a charismatic person. And there's little likelihood that the successors who come into place now will be any more so.
The White House, of course, carefully watching developments unfold here. It was about a 12-hour or so search before these rescue crews found the helicopter, downed helicopter, no signs of life. And those that I spoke to in the last 24 hours or so really concerned that Iran would try to point the fingers elsewhere for this crash, namely at Israel, suggesting that they'd rather push this conspiracy that someone else did this rather than accept fault, that they couldn't protect their own president, that it was just simply a crash. That, to this point, has not happened in any real way. Doesn't mean, of course, that could not change in the days ahead. In a particularly unstable region, also, U.S. officials tell me they're watching what, if any, response there might be from some of Iran's proxy groups, Hezbollah and the like, if they try to use this as some sort of impetus to spark further violence at a time of real war in Gaza, at a time when the world is watching to see when Israel's push into Rafah might begin. But at least to this point, relatively calm. But if this, Mika, the helicopter's only been recovered in the last few hours. U.S. officials speaking to allies in the region to try to get a sense of stability there.
Must get on to the news. The Trump criminal hush money trial will resume this morning for what could be the final day of testimony. Michael Cohen is set to return to the stand for a third day of cross-examination. Former President Trump's legal team has said this will be its final day questioning him. The prosecution has already confirmed Cohen is its final witness and will likely rest its case after his testimony is complete. The defense focused much of Thursday's cross-examination on a key 2016 call where Cohen previously said he spoke directly to the former president about his hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Trump lawyer Todd Blanche pressed Cohen on that conversation, bringing up a text exchange he had with Trump's bodyguard right before the call that seemed to suggest the topic was about a prank caller, not Stormy Daniels. Cohen insisted he spoke about both things, despite the call's short length. The other big question is if Donald Trump takes the stand. Last week, lawyers for the former president said they were still unsure if Trump would testify, even though he has said publicly he would like to. Trump's legal team also said they may not call any other witnesses. Judge Merchan told both sides to be ready for closing arguments as early as tomorrow if the prosecution and the defense rest. Let's go to the courthouse and bring in former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, do you expect things to wrap up or a surprise Trump witness on the stand?
Mika, I'm not sure that I expect Donald Trump to testify, but it's also possible that we could get other witnesses, including witnesses that we haven't necessarily foreseen. That's because if the defense feels it necessary to rebut Michael Cohen, they might put some other people on the stand that they think can demonstrate that his account of the narrative here is not true. We have other media outlets reporting last week that one of those witnesses could be Bob Costello, who is best known perhaps as Rudy Giuliani's close friend and former lawyer. He's also represented Steve Bannon. But in this context, what Costello has to offer is that he tried to represent Michael Cohen, who strung him along for a series of months. In their exchanges, Cohen says Costello essentially dangled a pardon to him and offered to be a back channel to the Trump White House before Michael Cohen decided, you know what, I'm not going in this direction. Costello has publicly said, including in congressional testimony as recently as last week, that everything Michael Cohen has to say is a lie. In fact, he was a witness for the defense before the grand jury. That's a unique feature of New York law, where the defense can call its own witnesses to the grand jury. And indeed, Robert Costello was their only witness last year before the indictment came down. So one thing I'm looking for today is not so much whether Trump's going to take the stand, which I think is increasingly unlikely, but whether we see Bob Costello do the same.
You know, as you will always say, Lisa, you never know how a jury is going to land on something. But since we've had the weekend, so far, how has the defense been able to damage or undermine Michael Cohen's testimony in a real and substantial way?
Well, you know, Mika, a lot of the things that they have used to try and undermine Michael Cohen's credibility are sort of sophisticated, complex stories, and it's not clear that the jury completely understands them. I'll give you one example. Michael Cohen pled guilty in 2018, yes, to campaign finance charges, but also to tax evasion that had nothing to do with Donald Trump. And since then, he has told a variety of different stories about why he pled guilty to tax evasion, testifying last fall, for example, at Trump's civil fraud trial, that he lied when he said under oath that he was guilty of tax evasion. On the stand in this case, on the other hand, he took a different tact. He said he wasn't quibbling with the underlying facts, but rather the process by which that plea was extracted from him. Todd Blanche spent a lot of time with respect to those three differing stories, but it's not clear that it was as intelligible to a jury hearing it for the first time as it was, for example, to you or me, people who have followed this drama very closely. But they've also spent some time, as you noted in your opening, with respect to the texts, right? And particularly this call that Michael Cohen says that he had with Keith Schiller, using Keith Schiller to sort of pass through the phone to Donald Trump. He says that October 24th phone call was an opportunity for him to get the boss's approval on the Stormy Daniels payment. It really is of no moment whether that was the phone call or not, because the records that are already in the case show that 2 days later, Michael Cohen and Donald Trump spoke themselves directly. So it's not clear whether this is landing or not. Let's see how Todd Blanche uses the remainder of his time today.
All right, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin at the courthouse. Thank you so much. We'll be watching. And here's something else that happened on Saturday at an NRA conference. Donald Trump again claimed he is the best president for Black Americans, and that he did more for the Black community as president than Abraham Lincoln, who, of course, abolished slavery. Take a look.
And likewise, we're doing record numbers with the African-American voters. They are tired of what's happening to them. And honestly, there's been no president since Abraham Lincoln, and perhaps in a certain way, including Abraham Lincoln, but there's been no president since Abraham Lincoln that has done more for the Black individual in this country than President Donald J. Trump. There's been nobody, not even close.
Well, you know, that statement is an insult to the intelligence of the American voters of all races. Donald Trump, under his presidency, nominated 3 justices that he takes credit for ending women's right to choose. These same 3 justices helped to change voting rights forever, taking out certain parts of the voting rights bill, and ended affirmative action. That's what Donald Trump did. We had record Black unemployment. He gave a fraction of what Joe Biden has given to HBCUs. So for him to say that he did more for Blacks than Barack Obama, than FDR, than Eisenhower, I'm talking about Republican and Democrat, more than Barack Obama, he didn't do more than George Bush, who I marched on as every opportunity that I had. So for him to say that is to say that we're stupid. And let me also say this. For him to float out there that he's thinking of trying to appeal to Black voters by putting someone like Tim Scott on the ticket, I dare Donald Trump to put Tim Scott on the ticket. Tim Scott was the one that helped to sabotage the George Floyd bill. He, Kamala Harris, and the senator from New Jersey were supposed to be the ones to bring it together, and Scott stopped it. Scott also opposed many of our efforts in the civil rights community. So be my guest, Donald. Think you can placate us with somebody that just genuflects to you rather than serves their constituents?
Well, and Jonathan Lemire, it really all goes together. We're talking about faith, and you have Donald Trump, who compares himself to God, or his followers say he's a Christ-like figure. And Donald Trump says he's never done anything that requires forgiveness from Jesus. And then this comparison to Abraham Lincoln. Just look at his appointments. Look at the record number of white men appointed to be federal judges and U.S. attorneys. I mean, just overwhelmingly exclusionary of black Americans. And again, you know, a president can appoint who a president wants to appoint, but please don't say that you're the new Abraham Lincoln if you basically had an almost whites-only club for judges and U.S. attorneys.
Yeah, the least diverse administration in modern American history. That's what Donald Trump had. But yet polls suggest he's making at least some inroads with black voters. It's certainly mystifying to some in the Biden camp. The president just concluded a week of events really aimed at black voters, trying to win them back, trying to show them, look, here's what I've done for you and here's what I can keep doing. And it's so important, because if those numbers stay where they are, even if Trump makes some inroads, and I don't think anyone expects him to make the inroads that polls suggest, but even a little bit in a race this close might mean something. So, Eddie, Donald Trump over the weekend, first of all, he compared himself to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the idea of serving more than 2 terms. So let's not overlook that. And then he talked about that he was done more for black Americans more than any president since Abraham Lincoln. So just these sort of dual threats, if you will. Give us your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's not gaslighting. I mean, Rev is absolutely right. I mean, Donald Trump in that moment is not gaslighting us. He's just being stupid. It just doesn't make any sense on any level. But I think the question, though, how you frame this, though, Jonathan and Joe, is about what does it mean that there seems to be a softening of black support for Joe Biden? Right? How do we understand that? How do we make sense of that? And this is the way I've been thinking about it. You guys tell me what you think about what I'm saying here. It's not so much about Biden himself. It's about how do white liberals respond in a moment when it seems that conservatism or white racism, let's not equate those two, but white racism has flared. The fever dream has flared. So when it seems as if racists or Donald Trump or MAGA folk are losing their mind, folk aren't fighting hard enough in response to them. And so around the Voting Rights Act, around the George Floyd Act, so there's this sense of, well, you're not fighting for us. They're losing their minds, right? We're not gonna do much here. And so I think President Biden has to show even more forcefully how he's fighting for the America that his rhetoric suggests. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to reach for something other than just simply black folks are being apathetic or they might vote for Trump. Something else is happening underneath this.
Yeah, and there is, Charlie, Charlie Sykes, following up on what Eddie said, a real concern that extreme MAGA supporters are following a president who, you know, is the president of Charlottesville, the Charlottesville Tiki Torch riots, president who was, made more racist, inflammatory comments than any president in recent history. And the question is, how do the Peter Millar vest wearing Republican investors who just saw the Dow go over 40,000, how do they respond to that?
Well, this is why campaigns matter. And I think this is something that we're going to have to remind voters of. What in fact, Donald Trump did, what his supporters are doing, what he is pledging to do. And again, in terms of police violence, he's made it very, very clear that he wants to immunize, police officers, no matter what they do in terms of African Americans. But, to Eddie's point here, what you see with Donald Trump is not just historical ignorance, comparing himself to Abraham Lincoln, but there is a little bit of gaslighting here. Donald Trump believes that if you just say something, somehow it makes it real, and that somehow we're in this reality distortion field where Donald J. Trump is saying that he has done more for African Americans than LBJ, FDR, Abraham Lincoln, and Barack Obama. I mean, we need to take a sort of a deep breath here and understand the technique that here is somebody who has played upon racial division, racial fears. This has been part of his brand from the very, very beginning, going back to the Central Park Five. And yet he's standing up there saying, I am the new Abraham Lincoln. If that's not gaslighting, I don't know what is. But again, obviously, it's also the stupidity burns in terms of the historical parallels.
Charlie Sykes and Eddie Glaude Jr., thank you both very much for being on this morning. Gun safety is far from the only Biden policy that Trump is vowing to undo if reelected. Among the many, he has promised measures against federal funding for issues pertaining to LGBTQ+ rights. To that end, the Human Rights Campaign today is announcing a $15 million investment to mobilize voters in 6 key swing states. Joining us now, the president of the Human Rights Campaign and the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, Kelly Robinson. She was recently named one of Time 100's most influential people of 2024. Congratulations on that. So who and where are the voters you are hoping to rally to show up for equality?
Look, this is a big deal. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot happening in the world, but this is something that people can be excited about. We have identified 75 million equality voters across this country that prioritize LGBTQ+ issues when deciding who to vote for. 75 million. I mean, that's equivalent to the number of total voters in all the swing states combined. So our job and what we're seeking to do through the We Show Up campaign is to turn them out to the polls, to make it clear exactly what's at stake, how scary and devastating a second Trump term would be, and make sure that they have the information and tools that they need to get out the vote.
So what is at stake? How scary is the concept of a second Trump administration for these communities especially?
Yeah, look, every time he opens his mouth, it's a new nightmare that comes out of it. I mean, we're talking about a person that's trying to make his way from the courthouse back into the White House yet again to torment our lives, our communities, and our families. And if I just look at the short term, with him putting in 3 Supreme Court justices and not only overturn Roe v. Wade, but also said out loud that next they would come for Obergefell, next they would come for Windsor, next they would come for Lawrence, Supreme Court cases that fundamentally establish rights for my community in this country. This is something that we can't take lightly. So when I think about this year, the contrast and the choice before us is clear. It's not just about 2 candidates. It's about 2 fundamentally different versions of our country we could be looking at after this November.
Is part of this campaign almost just hearing what you're describing here, almost to show what he's already done, what has already literally happened, not, figuratively. He's already done damage to women's rights. Women, young women, do not have the rights I grew up with. Because of Donald Trump. How will you articulate that when you go after these voters for equality voters, as you call them?
It's exactly what you said. We don't have to wonder about what a second presidential term for Donald Trump would look like, because he has already shown us and he continues to tell us. I mean, your last clip just showed that so clearly. Not only that, Project 2025 says out loud that they're coming after marriage equality. I mean, he's really seeking to roll back the rights that we've gained not only the last 20 or 40 years, but over the last 100. So this campaign is about reminding voters about that reality. And the beautiful thing about equality voters is that they represent so many parts of our community. They're overwhelmingly people of color. They skew heavily to be women, allies, and the LGBTQ community, and younger. And especially that young generation, we have to remember that in 2020, they were just coming of age politically. So we've got to remind them of what that chaos was and of their power to change the future.
You're looking at swing states, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Nevada, this $15 million campaign. How will you implement it? Is it ads or is it field operations? What are we going to see?
All of it. We're going to be knocking on doors. We're going to be making phone calls. We're going to be recruiting volunteers. We're going to be putting up paid ads so people can understand the realities of what's at stake and turning these folks out. Because at the end of the day, this election, the presidency, is going to come down to tens of thousands of voters in a handful of states. So when I look at equality voters, we've got 1.4 million identified in the state of Arizona alone, and that race was determined by 20,000 voters in 2020. Same thing if you look at Wisconsin. We've got 1 million equality voters there, and it was a difference of about 20,000 voters that made the difference in 2020 to get President Biden into office. So this matters.
Yeah, keep us posted. President of the Human Rights Campaign, Kelly Robinson, thank you so much for coming on this morning. We appreciate it. We want to go right to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is there. And Vaughn, I take it there have been some changes in the schedule that might indicate some new dimensions that could take place in the next day or two. Tell us what you know.
Right, Mika, this is quite the development for Monday morning here. There was a question of whether ultimately we could get a verdict as early as this Thursday before Memorial Day weekend. We expect cross-examination to continue momentarily of Michael Cohen in Lower Manhattan. We expect that cross-examination to take about an hour. And then the redirect from the prosecution of Michael Cohen, we expect that to take about another hour. That would take us to around the lunch break here today. It would then be the defense's opportunity to call their own witnesses forward. They have one individual who they have suggested they may bring forward. They have not ruled out bringing Donald Trump to the stand, though. But this is where the big development just in the last moments inside the courtroom are, because after all the witnesses have been called, that's when you have summations, or you could call it closing arguments. And that could have started as early as tomorrow. But Judge Merchan inside of this courtroom announcing that summations, closing arguments in the Donald Trump's first criminal trial will not begin until after Memorial Day, next Tuesday, saying that he was concerned that closing arguments and then the deliberation process for the jury to determine whether Donald Trump is guilty or not, that there could be with that 4-day weekend in hand. There is no court Friday. There's no court Saturday, no court Sunday. Memorial Day is Monday. And so there is concern about having such a long break between closing arguments and jury instructions and the jury charge to the point of the actual deliberation of the jury. So Donald Trump's criminal trial will not be ending this week. It will extend into next week.
Okay, and we've got his morning talk going on there. Let's bring in our legal experts to talk more about this as Vaughn brings us the reporting from the courthouse. NBC News legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Andrew Weissmann, MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, and former U.S. attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance also with us. Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, and White House correspondent for Politico, co-author of the Playbook, Eugene Daniels, and of course Politico's Jonathan Lemire is still with us. Let's just go right in line. Andrew Weissmann, I'll start with you. Any indication what these changes could mean as well, just upon hearing them?
Well, I think it is very much at face value that Judge Merchan last week had said that he did not want a significant break between the summations of the parties and the actual deliberations. And so by putting this off to start on Tuesday next week, not tomorrow, he avoids that situation because this week they're not sitting on Wednesdays, which is typical. They normally don't sit on Wednesdays, and they weren't sitting on Fridays. It was going to be a significant issue from the judge's perspective. Also, we do have, as Vaughn said, this potential issue of Mr. Costello testifying. That's sort of been floated over the weekend as a possible defense witness. It's quite curious. I'm sure Joyce has a lot to say about that because Mr. Costello has already been the subject of a lot of evidence put in by the state of emails and texts with Mr. Cohen that really suggested that he was acting on behalf of the former president to try and keep Michael Cohen in the fold to prevent him from cooperating. So it'd be very interesting to see if he testifies because, I mean, perhaps the defense would get something, but I suspect the prosecution is more than ready to cross-examine him. So it remains to be seen whether that happens later today.
All right, we'll get to Joyce's opinion in just a moment, but right down the line, Danny Cevallos as well. Your thoughts. Might we see Trump on the stand? Doubt it, right? Doubt it, right?
Doubt it. Mika, I've been taking the underdog bet, and really for no other reason than if he ended up testifying, I would have been the lone voice to say he was likely to testify. But he's not likely to testify. That was just brazen self-promotion on my part. He's very unlikely to testify. But what I find, what defense attorneys will tell you in these white-collar type cases, you often have defendants who think, gosh, if I could just get in front of the jury, I'll explain everything. This is just a big misunderstanding. And as the trial goes on, they start seeing what it's really like to be in the crucible of cross-examination. And I think it really truly is a last-minute decision for many defense teams and many defendants who are watching this go on and realizing that if they take the stand, they're creating a lot of risk. But I'll say this. Mika, two things. Number one, I wish more defendants would testify. More and more, I'm starting to think that sometimes defendants can testify and they won't because the second thing I want to say is we defense attorneys are risk averse. We're terrified of being that courthouse tale of the case that they had it won and then the dopey guy called his client to the stand and just destroyed his own case. None of us want to be a cautionary tale, and for that reason, very rarely do we call our clients to the stand. But I've often wondered if that might be at this point more myth, that maybe some defendants could help themselves by testifying. I'm not so sure that Trump is that defendant. And I'm not about to start calling my clients to the stand just because I'd like to see what happens.
Right. No, that probably is not a cool move. So Joyce fans, I guess right now there's a little sidebar happening, and they're discussing with the judge certain emails and evidence that the defense wants to use in its cross of Cohen, which is going to happen today. That's the plan today. This judge seemed to really be moving this along at a tight clip, fair to say. And what are your thoughts on the changing dynamics of the situation?
Right. So I think this new schedule, Mika, represents practical reality. No judge, and Judge Merchan had said he did not wants to permit this big break in time between when the lawyers make their closing arguments and when the jury deliberates. There's just all sort of potential problem. We know how memory fades in that situation. There's an increased risk of outside influence on jurors. So this is a smart move designed to get the case past the holiday weekend, and then it can finish up.
Siobhan Hilliard, so there's a bit of a change of plans here. Give us a quick sense as to what you're hearing from our reporters inside the courtroom as to how the first minutes of today's testimony have started, and any other sort of observations or insights you're gleaning as to how the week may unfold.
Right, they were actually asked to come into court early today, Donald Trump, the defense team, as well as the prosecution. The jury is not yet seated here, so we have not begun Michael Cohen's fourth day of testimony. But right now there is some deliberation over other emails that can be brought in before the jury into the record. But there is also current deliberation over the most likely defense witness there, who was the former FEC Commissioner Brad Smith, who was a commissioner during the Bush presidency. The defense has suggested they'd like to bring him to the stand, but where the defense would like to use him is to tell the jury what campaign finance laws and to have him interpret the campaign finance laws for this jury, which the prosecution has fought back on, that it is only the judge who is the one to determine whether in instructions of this jury here, what part of the law that they are to be looking at as it pertains to the actual charges against Donald Trump. And so there is some discrepancy over exactly how this witness, the former FEC commissioner, if he were to take the stand, what he could actually testify to as an expert witness. There has been some back and forth over these expert witnesses. The defense team wants to be able to ask them to lay this out a little bit more clearly for the jury. So that's kind of where we stand right now before we wait for Michael Cohen to come back into the courtroom.
I'm thrilled to introduce you to something I'm incredibly proud of. My own brand of organic specialty coffee, Rudy Coffee. Believe me when I say it's the best coffee you'll ever try. It's smooth, rich, chocolatey, and gentle on your stomach. It's so good, I even recommend drinking it black. It comes in 3 varieties, including what I promise is the best decaf you'll ever have. By supporting Rudy Coffee, you're not just treating yourself to exceptional coffee, you're also supporting our cause, the cause of truth, justice, and American democracy.
I think I'll stick to Pete's coffee.
I mean, Mika.
Yeah.
So, power abhors a vacuum. You have turned your back on Starbucks coffee after a quarter century.
Literally.
The void has been filled. Rudy heard.
No.
Rudy responded. Rudy has coffee for you. Yes.
No, I will. Well, that was just, that was horrible. That was the worst commercial I've ever seen. Is it 1972? My Lord.
America's mayor. Right there.
America's mayor. Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, of course, finding a new way to make some cash. Amid declaring bankruptcy, of course, he says you're helping America. You can get the coffee, which comes in 3 roasts.
Yes.
America's mayor
This is what America needs right now.
And fighting for justice.
It's what America has been asking for. Coffee from Rudy Giuliani.
Guess what a bag will cost
dripping
you?
Mascara fame. Now, by the way, there is Jonathan Lemire. If you have a sip,
$30.
And you taste something that's a bit pungent. It is Jonathan Lemire. It is actually Rudy's, and this is why this is so personal to him. It's Rudy's sweat.
The hair
mixed
dye.
in wee bit of hair dye going into the coffee. It's all part. It's that secret ingredient that puts it over the top.
Just for men. That's the ingredient. It is.
And Rudy's sweat.
Deeply embarrassing. This is someone who, for a time, was known as America's mayor. This is someone who was, for a handful of weeks, a legitimate American hero. And it would be difficult to find too many people, too many characters in our nation's history who have fallen further faster than Rudy Giuliani, who attached his star to Donald Trump, Mika, and has taken one disgrace after another since, to the point, as you're about to explain, exactly how he celebrated his birthday this year.
Okay, we're going to get to that, but the hair dye and the sweat in the coffee, that makes it taste like Starbucks. So maybe he's on to something.
Oh, come on.
It does. It's got a bad taste to it.
Stop it.
My habit was like 15, 16, 17 years of drinking it every day. I stayed with it for a year, Joe. And I kept saying, this doesn't taste right. Maybe it's Florida.
Let me just say, Rudy has some habits, and he's helping the coffee pays for him.
Okay,
we need to revive the spirit of bipartisanship in this country. I know that sounds bizarre in light of where we are. The spirit of being able to work with one another. When I say that, and I said that from the time I announced, I was told that maybe that was the way things used to work, Joe. You got a lot done before, Joe, but you can't do that anymore. Well, I'm here to tell you and say we can. And we must if we're going to get anything done. Democracy requires consensus. I'm running as a proud Democrat, but I will govern as an American president.
That was then candidate Joe Biden 1 month before the 2020 election. Now, fast forward to today, and despite all the divisions we hear about in Washington, all we see, all we read about, President Biden and congressional leaders have been able to deliver on a number of bipartisan results since his inauguration. And let me just say, that was Joe Biden in 2020. I will tell you, and we talked about it a good bit on this show, in 2021, and even early into 2022, you actually had people on both sides mocking Joe Biden, saying, oh, you know, he's an old man. He's a man out of time. Maybe that worked when he was in the Senate. It doesn't work now. And it wasn't just Republicans or people in the media saying it. It was a lot of progressives in his own party saying you can't work with Republicans. Democrats and Republicans can't work together to get anything done these days. Well, with us now, senior editor for the New York Times, David Leonhardt. He argues in a new piece that this unexpected cooperation could be attributed to a new age of centrism. David, I just want to read part of this that jumped out at me yesterday when I was reading the Times. In a country that's supposed to have been gridlocked federal government the past 4 years are hard to explain. These years have been arguably the most productive period of Washington bipartisanship in decades, and it has been since the Clinton era. Under President Biden, you write, bipartisan majorities have passed major laws on infrastructure and semiconductor chips, as well as laws on veterans' health, gun violence, the postal service, the aviation system, same-sex marriage, anti-Asian hate crimes, and the electoral process, on trade, The Biden administration has kept some of the Trump administration's signature policies and even expanded them. The trend continued over the past month with the bipartisan bill to Ukraine and, of course, TikTok, the TikTok issue. So, David, listen, this is extraordinary, and you try to explain that there's a common thread that runs through a lot of this legislation.
There is. I mean, that does not sound like a gridlocked country, does it, or a gridlocked Washington?
No, it doesn't. No.
And I think the common thread is that we see on both the left and the right, both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, a new skepticism about what people often describe as neoliberalism or the Washington consensus. There was this idea in the 90s and early 2000s that we're going to do free market economics and it's going to make America prosperous and China free. And those predictions sort of went 0 for 2. Our economy has been struggling, particularly for middle class and working class people, for decades. And obviously, this sort of world of more open markets has not led to a freer China or freer Russia. And so for all the problems we have, for all the threats to democracy that, as you've been covering, Donald Trump represents in many ways, for all the problems we have, we do have this shared recognition among large parts of the Democratic Party and some parts of the Republican Party that the government needs to do more, both to help people in this country and to take on our foreign rivals. And I use the word neopopulism, which is deliberately meant to kind of play off neoliberalism. And I think that's what we see in a lot of these bills.
David, in reading your piece, probably 3,000 words, filled with insight, filled with accuracy, I couldn't help but think that all of the programs that have been passed with bipartisan effort that you pointed out, that there's not as much gridlock as most people think in Washington, D.C., yet still, out in the country, the legislation that used to be aimed at helping people grow their families, do a little bit better, that is still seemingly not there as much as it ought to be. And I'm wondering, do you think Horatio Alger is dead?
Well, Horatio Alger was always a little bit exaggerated. I don't think he's dead. But look, Joe Biden has not turned around the American economy 180 degrees. These things take a long time. We're still going to need a lot more policies to help workers. I think labor unions play an important role, and labor unions are still very much on the defensive. I think education plays an important role, and our education system has terrible problems exacerbated by the school closures during COVID. And so I'm not suggesting that everything's great. What I would instead say is I think we've seen a little bit of a turning point here. And the question is, does it continue to the point where Americans actually are experiencing meaningful improvements in their living standards? That's not going to happen on a presidential campaign timetable, but it could happen eventually.
David, when I read your piece, the question that I wanted to raise, and I'm thankful I have the opportunity to raise it to you directly, is that there has been a lot done in a bipartisan way, yet both parties don't emphasize this bipartisanship. Do you think it's because on the right and the left, the liberal and the conservative, the fear of being called sellouts by the extremists, so they kind of quietly do this, which is for the good of all, but don't tell anybody almost?
I do think that's part of it. And look, just to be a little bit critical of my own industry, I think some of it is that we in the media cover conflict, right? And so conflict tends to get a lot of the attention, whereas when you actually see consensus and legislating, it gets less attention. I mean, you know, one interesting example here is President Biden's most popular accomplishments are these things on health care, lowering health care costs. Those were a partisan bill. Republicans did not vote for them. But Republicans have very skillfully basically spent very little time criticizing that bill, I think because they understand if they criticize it, it would lead to conflict and it would get more attention. And they don't want it to get more attention because of how popular it is.
So, David, let's move beyond the Beltway a little bit here. Are you seeing this in the states as well? State houses, city halls, state legislatures, this move towards centrism? And if so, do we think that those officials may someday carry that with them to Washington as well?
I mean, I think states and cities have always been better at finding bipartisan solutions and solutions that are a little less driven by these national divisive issues than Washington is. So what I would say that we see real agreement around the country on, and this is an issue that's tough for Democrats, is immigration. You see both Democratic governors and Republican governors and mayors saying, hey, our border is broken. And that is something that has been arguably the Biden administration's biggest domestic failure. failure, their inability to solve that border problem. And you see from both Democrats and Republicans around the country this basically pleading to Washington, please solve this issue. We cannot deal with these levels of migration that we've been having in Denver, in Chicago, in New York, and obviously along the southern border.
Senior writer for the New York Times, David Leonhardt, thank you so much for coming in. Great piece. We appreciate it. And next, April's jobs number showed slower than expected growth, a sign the job market could be cooling off. The U.S. added 175,000 jobs last month, below the 240,000 that was estimated. This comes as April's unemployment number ticked up slightly, rising to 3.9% against an estimate of 3.8. Joining us now, Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su. A lot to talk to you about today. Thanks for coming in. Let's talk about the jobs numbers, unemployment ticking up a little bit, and then we'll dig into it. Overall, the strength of the economy, average American is still feeling it. How do these jobs numbers play into it?
Well, let's look at the overall numbers here. Okay. Since President Biden came into office, we've had 15.8 million jobs created. That's the most of any president in the same time period. And at the same time, as you noted, the unemployment rate remains under 4%. It's now been under 4% for 27 months straight. That's over 2 years. That's the longest stretch since the 1960s. So if you look at the big picture, especially when compared to what President Biden inherited when he came to office, this is a sign that the steady, stable growth that the president promised and that his experienced leadership is able to deliver is something that is happening all across the country.
Work is paying off. Madam Secretary, digging into the numbers, while the labor force participation rate for prime age workers remains strong overall, it hit a historic high for working women, the highest ever since data has been collected. To what do you put this on?
I mean, again, this is because the president has said from day one, we're going to build an economy from the bottom out and the middle up, meaning we are going to make sure no one is left behind. And our investments are reflecting that commitment to equity. And so women, for too long, have been left out of good job opportunities. And we are saying no more, not on our watch. And women are coming back into the labor market. Remember how devastating COVID was for women workers.
Terrible.
We are seeing that the investments that we're making, the commitment to an infrastructure that will support women in the workplace is also making a difference.
I think hybrid work, too, also helped. I mean, there's been some interesting positive offshoots of what we learned during COVID, but we end up doing a lot more, but it makes it more possible.
And part of the story, Mika, is that there is more work to do, right? We are saying that we've made significant progress, especially, again, when you look at where we started in January of 2021. But also, we know there's a study that we did that says that if this country invested in our care infrastructure, because women still bear the majority responsibility for care work, and in family supporting policies like a national paid leave policy, the way comparable countries do, we would be able to bring 5 million more women into the workforce to the tune of $775 billion of
and you would lose less.
A year.
You would lose less.
Exactly. So the question isn't, can we afford to do it? The question is, how can we afford
Why not? Right, exactly. And then inflation, really quickly. Where's this going? It still feels bad. It feels really bad at the grocery store.
This is, one of the president's #1 economic priorities. And we are fighting on all fronts, right? Obviously, the cost of health care is one of the things that the American people feel. And we have brought down the cost of health care. We are looking at the cost of prescription drugs, negotiating certain drugs and making sure that insulin is capped at $35 a month. So fighting inflation is a #1 priority. At the same time, the economic policies of this president have resulted in real wage gains, especially for low and middle income Americans, which means more breathing room and more room in working families' pockets.
And before you go, Madam Secretary, you're the only AANHPI Cabinet Secretary, and it is AAHNPI Awareness Month. Thoughts on how we should be recognizing these communities.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this is a month to celebrate the beautiful diversity of all of us who call ourselves Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. And for President Biden, who believes, not just in theory, but in this idea of a country, you know, out of many, one. And, you know, the celebration of diversity is something that's very core to who he is. And so having Ambassador Catherine Tai representing us on the United States stage, having a vice president whose mother was born in India and understands the immigrant experience, very much core to the values that this president brings to the country.
All right, so happy AANHPI Heritage Month. Thank you so much, Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. And